Welcome to the InnerVerse. Fear is an illusion.
Welcome to the One Within All to another episode of InnerVerse Podcast. I'm your host, Chance, and on this beautiful day in June, in our glorious creation, what could be better than scratching the itch for a deep Tolkien talk with today's guest, Professor Rachel Fulton Brown, aka Fencing Bear. In the words of our illustrious friend Gabriel, the slick dissident, philology is lockpicking. And through language, the mystery of history reveals itself in ways that human memory has long since forgotten. Perhaps there have been none quite so wise in the spirit of Logos in our current age since the Renaissance days when Petrarch lamented the loss of Alexandria's grand library as the great J.R.R. Tolkien, who so deftly illuminated the nature of our realm through the awesomest of allegories, the Lord of the Rings, and the vast legendarium it engendered. Today, with our illustrious guest, Professor Rachel Fulton Brown, we will explore the unexplorable reaches of ancient history that Tolkien's works have purveyed to us, while considering the larger themes of creation and subcreation, the spiritual necessity of dissonance, Tolkien's cosmogony and its relation to the esoteric mystery doctrines, the geography of Middle-earth, and the possibility of alternate forms of humanoid beings that may have once or yet still exist upon our realm. You can find Professor Brown at her blog, fencingbear@prayer.blogspot.com, also at the dragoncommonroom.com, dragoncommonroom.com, and on unauthorized.tv, where she has a vast series called The Forge of Tolkien, which I'm sure we will talk about some of the things that are in that today. I'm super excited to get into this one. Been way too long since I did a podcast about my all-time favorite author. So thanks for being here, Rachel, and welcome to the InnerVerse.
Thank you for having me, Chance. It's going to be fun.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's the funnest of all the fun to talk about.
Fun seems a very pale word to use to talk about Tolkien, but I'm sure you'd approve. It's going to be fun.
Yes.
Hobbity. It's going to be Hobbity.
So, Rachel, maybe since I really just grabbed you for this interview on gut instinct, that little small still voice in my head was like, this is the person. You know, I stumbled across your work on Unauthorized while at that time wanting to have a Tolkien chat. So maybe you can introduce me and the audience a little more to you, what you've been doing for the last many years, how Tolkien plays into that, and your personal hero's journey.
It's been quite a journey. So I'm a medieval historian, and I teach history of Christianity, European civilization, liturgy, exegesis, devotion, symbolism at the University of Chicago. I've also been teaching for the last 20 some years a course on Tolkien, which I call Tolkien Medieval and Modern, very specifically on sort of themes of subcreation and fairy and history, sort of where Tolkien gets his stories, how to craft our own within his legendarium. And that series, or the series of videos on Unauthorized, Forge of Tolkien, draws off of that class that I've taught at the University of Chicago, but goes much, much deeper, because at Chicago, I get 10 weeks or 9 weeks. and it's a limited series, whereas my unauthorized videos are going much deeper into what I've been working with on that course. So we can go any direction, right? We can go why I took this spiritual journey, what I do with my class, what I do in those videos. I'm happy to talk about Tolkien.
Yeah, I think I just want to jump right into the deep. With Tolkien, it is such a powerful allegory that I'm surprised that there isn't a name for like a Tolkien-based religion, the way people self-identify as Jedi. You know what I mean?
It's called Christianity. I mean, everybody knows that. And this is one of the challenges in teaching the course. And now that I've done the videos and I'm starting to get to talk to people outside of the university, that people come to Tolkien wanting to be inside that story. And one of the things I do in the course is sort of say, well, what he thought he was doing was showing you the way in which, as he says in mythopoeia, we make still by the law in which we're made. But for him, that was within the understanding of ourselves as creatures of God, right? So you said subcreation at the beginning, that we are creatures made to be artists, made to subcreate within that world. But for him, it was always as a Catholic. And there's a famous letter where he's writing to Father Robert Murray, who asks him various questions about, it's like, what kind of story is this? And he said, well, it's fundamentally Catholic, unconsciously at first, consciously so in the revision. And I think, one of the wonderful things about thinking about Tolkien is understanding what that means. People, unfortunately, now tend to think of Christianity as this checklist of doctrines, right? And what Tolkien did was realize that it's a longing for being in that story. So when you say is there a religion? Well, yes, there is. But we in the modern world have lost sight of what that story actually is. And that's what Tolkien was working within. It's what he tried to convince Lewis of in that poem, Mythopoeia, and why Lewis becomes Christian. Right. So if you say, why isn't there a religion? Well, there is, but we've lost sight of it. It's been obscured to us by centuries of, well, I would say scholastic theology, but then I'll get into even more trouble. So we can go there if you want. But it is in fact Christian, but explaining why that's the case is a challenge.
Yeah, I totally get it. I mean, even putting a certain label like that on an individual like Tolkien, we all have our personal interpretation of what it means to be Christian or what it means to be Catholic. I get the sense from his work that it's Catholic in the sense of universal, that what the Catholic faith was maybe initially meant to be, and for a lot of people still is, would be the extension of the first wisdom that rational beings would have been endowed with upon their creation, that has been diluted and, lost in many ways as incorrect ideas have been given, dissonance and have risen up in prominence. So, for you, or for what you understand of Tolkien, do you think that this Catholic label maybe is a bit different or more expansive or ancient than Christianity as it's known by the common folk?
So I'm going to push back and say, no, he's Roman Catholic, and he meant that. But I think what you've described about how he understood what Catholicism is accurate. It's like what he's trying to do. See, this is going to be my challenge to persuade you of that, right? Because it's like in his letters, and if you read his letters, when he's writing to his sons, therefore when he's writing most as himself and least to the public, most privately, what he says to them over and over and over again is the great drama of everything. It's like the greatest romance is the Mass. When he was growing up, his mother converted from Anglicanism to Catholicism and was abandoned by her family. I mean, she's already widowed because their father died when she was with the boys in Africa. Their father went back to England and died, and they never saw him again. So she brought Hilary and Ronald back to England, and they're little boys, right? They're children, and she, as a widow, is taking care of them and converts to Catholicism, and her entire family abandons her. So not only is she a widow, but she has no support of her own community because they're all Anglican. And then she dies and the boys are left orphaned, and she made Father Frank Morgan, their guardian. So he has a Catholic priest as a guardian. And then when he falls in love with Edith, who becomes his wife, first Father Morgan forbids them to see each other because they're underage at the time. And so he obeys his guardian and doesn't talk to her for several years. When he becomes of age, sits up in bed on the midnight of January 3rd and writes to her and says, we should be married. She is already engaged to somebody else. He goes and talks to her where she's living then and says, no, we really should be married, but you have to become Catholic first. He really meant it. And likewise, when he's trying to convince Lewis of the truth of the mythologies, he's doing it with Hugo Dyson on this famous walk on Addison's Walk behind Magdalen College. And Lewis is in this mode of, mythology is lies. It's all, maybe there's truths in it, but it's breathed through silver. It's all, theologically irrelevant whether or not the truths are there. And Tolkien is like, no, it's true, right? So I think if we're going to talk about what Tolkien's actual convictions were, you have to have some sense of what he risked and what he sacrificed to be Catholic. It wasn't nothing.
Yeah, that's one of the age-old questions is what is and isn't true or historical about the mythology. And you can come at it from one of two angles. Me personally, I am very interested in the study of mythology and etymology and the keys to the mysteries that are there for those who have eyes to see in pretty much every branch of human so-called spirituality throughout history. And the question is, are those keys there because we're looking at a system, a craft that had a common origin and then spread out? Or are those keys there of consistency because we're talking about true events? And those are questions that are very hard to, that's a personal conviction. You kind of have to, I don't know how you can prove it one way or the other. And to me, it's not something worth being divided over, but perhaps the value in comparative studies would be to see that the truth is there for all people to see at any time in any place. And that's like the nature of the realm, and the nature of truth is that it can't be concealed.
Yep, that's all true. and no, but the thing is, what's interesting is it's like, and I appreciated that you took a risk having me on and talking to you. So I'm just going to be honest with you about it's like if we say yes, that's what Christianity teaches, then everybody goes, oh no, it's not true. I feel threatened. If I just say yes, what you just said is absolutely true, and it is in fact what Christianity teaches, it's interesting that we have difficulty hearing it. And what Tolkien tells Lewis in Mythopoeia, this I'm sure you know the poem, the poem, is that something I need to introduce?
I actually have not read that one.
Okay, so it's published. It's published in Tree and Leaf in the little volume that includes On Fairy Stories and Leaf by Niggle, and it's this wonderful iambic pentameter verse that Tolkien wrote in the early 30s, inspired by Lewis's making the kinds of arguments you are, right? Lewis has been studying mythology. They've been meeting as coal biters. They're reading the Icelandic sagas, and Lewis, has been, reading mythologies and such for decades, and they're both professors or in some kind of teaching position at Oxford at the time. And Lewis doesn't want to say it's Christian, right? He just wants to say it's got to be some truth in there. And Tolkien is trying to convince him. And it's interesting, he does it in poetry instead of any other way. He doesn't do it in argument, right? He's not going to sit down and say, well, here's the Trinity, which as you found me on the Unauthorized, that's a debate in that field, right? We have to believe this, that, and the other, or else you're damned. And Tolkien never does that, right? He has very little discussion of the Trinity. I don't know that he does it ever, right? What he cared about was saying, these things that you are sensing, the patterns, what you Chance just said, you put it as an either or. Are they patterns out there, or is it just truth? Well, they are, right? It's patterns and truth. What Tolkien wanted to say is this is in fact the revelation that we have, through, as I say, the tradition through Christ, of ourselves as creatures made to be images of that creator, right? So what you just said is absolutely accurate. It's these patterns that we see ourselves participating in. It's the truth that's been revealed to us. It's very interesting to me that because of the way people badly teach, I think this is why I say my particular beef is with the scholastics who want everything to be, well, it's logically provable, but and I can understand that too. But they turned it into this thing that you're going to beat people over the head with if they don't believe it. And I obviously don't believe that's a very good method of coming to that understanding. I think what you're describing in your quest is actually appropriate.
Very cool.
I can
I'm
get
very.
the poem out if you want me to read it.
Oh, is it pretty brief?
No, it's long, but it's I can give you a taste of it. Let me pull. I've got stacks of books around me, so I live in books, right? And I'm also told you never read on the internet. Too bad, I do.
I do sometimes. It's all right.
So this is the beginning of the poem is he's arguing with Lewis about, you know, like how you label what language means. I think you'd like this, and saying, you know, that in fact it's only through language that we come to reality, but in fact reality is itself this kind of patterned beauty, and yet it's not real until we can name it, until we can put it into stories. And he says things like this: unless we can see them with our minds, with our human minds, and they're just like balls of, you know, atomic energy or something like that. But whereas if we as storytellers start naming them as celestial beings and so forth, it becomes more real in an interesting way. So he says things like, he sees no stars who does not see them first, of living silver made, that sudden burst to flame like flowers beneath an ancient song, whose very echo after music long has since pursued. There is no firmament, only a void, unless a jeweled tent, myth woven and elf patterned, and no earth unless the mother's womb, whence all have birth. The heart of man is not compound of lies, but draws some wisdom from the only wise, and still recalls him. Though now long estranged, man is not wholly lost nor wholly changed. Disgraced he may be, yet he is not dethroned, and keeps the ragship of lordship once he owned. His world dominion by creative act, not his to worship, the great artifact. Man, subcreator, the refracted light, through whom is splintered from a single white to many hues, and endlessly combined in living shapes that move from mind to mind. Though all the crannies of the world we filled with elves and goblins, though we dared to build gods in their houses out of dark and light, and sow the seed of dragons, 'twas our right, used or misused. The right has not decayed. We make still by the law in which we're made. So that's his argument about the kinds of stories that Lewis is saying they're just fictions and lies, and he says no, they are the truth, right? Because we are creatures of the Creator, and we're making still by the law in which we made. We make understanding in stories because we are creatures of that Creator. So when you earlier just now said, you know, do we see are we part of this pattern? Well, yes. Is it true? Well, yes. Right. But the sort of revelation of what that truth is what Tolkien is saying we get to through this storytelling.
I totally get it. Yeah,
okay.
that makes a lot of sense, because, I mean, just think about the idea of a pattern, that we can see this in nature all over the place, in the cyclical seasons, in the 9 months of gestation, in anything that nature builds. There is an order of operations. It's math. It's ma'at. You know, that's how divine harmony and order is achieved, is through things occurring according to a pattern, a framework that is pre-existing in some way. And then you have the word for father, pater, that's pattern. You know, there's a lot of other things that you can pull out of that word, but the concept of logos, or the word, as it's been attributed to many savior and solar deities apart in other places and other times, universally, could be in itself a reflection of the fact that it's the mediator through which we can comprehend the Father, the pattern. We cannot reach it without this capacity of the language, the label, the creative spoken word, which is, to me, pretty fascinating conceptually, since we have thought, you know, thought being an example here, we have thought that only really arises through language, through this operating system, if you want to call it such. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about the pattern as Tolkien allegorizes in his Cosmogony. I'm loving the music of the Einar, as it's called, the chief of the gods, or the first cause, Iluvatar, or Elu, I think it's called, right? Or
Eru, the one. There was Eru, the one.
Right. And Eru is, even calling it Eru is very reminiscent of, say, like the ancient Grecian system that put the firstborn of the first cause as Eros, right? Which I comprehend as being, as a part of this pattern, as a symbolic representation of the savior or mediating force, that part of like what saves humanity is Eros, in the sense that without the masculine and feminine generative principles being brought together through the spark of attraction of those two poles being separate, we would have no, progeny. We'd have no future. That Eros principle in its simplest form is often allegorized with the lingam and yoni, and then the boat that they create when put together, the whole being the yoni and the mast being the lingam, and the savior of man, or the incarnation of the first cause, being the one that rides on the boat and restarts humanity after a cycle ends and everything is reset, so to speak. So I'm sure there may be more than what the cosmogony of Tolkien that you want to respond to in that, but I'm definitely interested.
But so what the way you're talking, I would be, it's like I live off reading lists, right? And those of your listeners, if they want to see some of mine so they know where I'm coming from, I have on Dragon Common Room, there's a whole page called study guides where I put a lot of my bibliographies and stuff. So you can check me out and figure out why I say what I do. But the way you're describing the sort of reality of these patterns and this structure, one, that from the 19th century, there was an effort to figure out, it's like, is there a truth in all of these stories? And I mean, the person that people usually reference is Campbell, Joseph Campbell, right? And he's going through and he's looking at all of these stories and saying, look, they have the same structures, they have the same, the hero's journey things. What the problem, and then I come in and I'm the historian, which was what Tolkien was also, right? Philology is language history, and sort of trying to find in the traces of the words that we have the stories that used to carry them. Right. So as a historian, that's what I'm also doing, and understanding that this desire to see the single truth in all of these mythologies. I'm sorry, but it is a Christian desire. It's the way that the efforts of the missionaries throughout the Middle Ages worked was, we have the truth, right? We know that we have the truth. It's revealed through Christ. He's the light. He's the logos. He's as you're very accurately describing, he's the way to the Father. All of that, absolutely true. How do we as Christians, say in the 7th century, communicate this reality to people who have never heard of it? Oh, well, we'll show them that in fact, those stories that they already have contain this same truth. For example, one of the texts that I've written about fairly extensively is called the Heliand. It's an old Saxon gospel harmony retelling of the gospel story, the Christ story, in Old German, right, the Old Saxon. And the author there, because he's writing for Saxons in like the 7th, 8th, I think it's 8th. Well, we don't really have dates on a lot of these things, right? We have manuscripts from the 9th, 10th century, but he's trying to explain who Christ is to these warriors, right? And the problem with it is, with like what they have is different stories about Woden and the way Woden gets knowledge, and the ravens come to him like memory and mind, and they speak to him, and he hangs on the tree and he gets the runes and things like that. Well, how, if you're a Christian, are you going to explain Christ to these warriors? Well, in the Heliand, what the poet does is show that Christ is Woden, right? He shows that, say, at the baptism of Christ, the dove comes down on Christ, and the heavens are opened, and you hear the voice saying, "This is my beloved son." Even
Odin even gets the spear in the side.
Right, all of that. So some of what we're doing, and we're trying to find the resonances and the reality behind these stories, is what Christianity has been doing since the beginning, right? Like Paul, when he goes to Athens and says, "Oh, I see you have an altar of the unknown God." Well, I know who it is, right? That with the Christian missionaries in the early Middle Ages, they're saying there is one story. It's about creation. It's about what you were just saying now, the love, right? That God, enters into this story and becomes part of it, and conquers the evil by climbing the cross and doing battle with Satan in that way. That is the way Christianity has always, properly speaking, tried to operate, to say there is one truth, there is a reality behind all of this, and we're going to show you the way in which the light has already been there to humanity previously, but now we have the fullness of that truth. Now that's what Tolkien is trying to do with Lewis and the mythopoeia too, because Lewis and they've all been reading all these mythologies, and they have this yearning, which I think you share, right? You, Chance, share for the truth. How can it be, there's not multiple truths. There's got to be a reality that we participate in. And the missionary argument is, well, yes, that's true, because God is available to humanity in our reason, in our passions, in our desire for him, in the love and the knowledge, for the love, love and knowledge.
Wisdom,
right? And that's impossible not to be participating in. And simply, as Christianity says, is, and through the incarnation, through Christ our Lord, we have been given the most full revelation of that truth. But it's there, available in all of those other stories, because it's the only one. Does that make sense?
I actually completely get what you're laying down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So try to do
so everything you keep saying is like, yeah, I go, yeah, that's true. Right. but the problem is to say, and from my perspective as a Christian, right, which is also Tolkien's sort of argument, is we can't see that fully. We can't see it. We see it fully through the light that is Christ. How's that?
Cool. Yeah. I have a lot of things I would like to respond to with that and see where it takes us. But okay, so Christianity.
You wanted a deep dive. Here we go.
Yeah, no, I'm loving it. So in my exploration of origins of Christianity, the word Christian, not really a biblical term, I've come across the ancient Greek crest.
Oh no, it actually is. It's in Antioch, in Acts, they were first called Christians.
Oh yeah, Antioch is a interesting rabbit hole in of itself. There's some Lord of the Seculum stuff going on there as well, which is what Christ represents, the king of an age, or a Nero, things of that nature. But I want to talk about Chres, the word that means good, essentially, in Greek. It's like chi, rho, eta, sigma, CHRES. And in this word, if you were to call somebody a Christian, which some of the early church fathers I've come across using that term, then you're calling them good men, calling yourself a good man, which I think is a great way to identify oneself. And with even the label of Christian, that what we're seeking is goodness, and goodness is aligning with nature and nature's pattern and how nature does things. Goodness is a emanation of that pattern in its proper place, right? I mean, sin, you could even look at as like the wrath of God comes through sin. And when we don't follow nature's pattern, we immediately experience consequences that are detrimental. And that's like very simple.
It's like God's. It's like, so we can go off way deep into theology. So you're going to have to keep pulling me back to Tolkien, but I can also do it this other way. That sin is it's its own punishment in a sense.
Exactly. Right? That's how I see it.
It's God's justice is we get the consequences of what we do. It's his mercy that we don't.
Yeah, and it's mercy that we get consequences for doing things out of order.
That too, true. Right.
Because it's a self-correcting principle. I mean, and this can lead us into, at some point, I want to have the discussion about dissonance in Tolkien's cosmogony with the character of Melkor, and the concept of a fallen demiurge and how that plays in. But specifically, though, back to this word cress, I like how, again, with like studying language, you find these little clues throughout it. And one of the clues is the idea of wisdom and the head, wisdom being at the head of everything, the top, arche, another word meaning head and wisdom, ras being a word for wisdom as well. The early bishops of the church, and for quite a long time, had this tendency to sign the name with the X or the cross before their name. So like you would sign it as X Brown, perhaps, or something like that. So, we see, so this is a little trick we can do when we're looking at ancient names or things related to the church, that potentially the first letter might be something that you could separate from the following letters. And when you look at cress, spelled with the Greek chi, which looks like our X, if you drop that X, then you got res or ras as the word. So right there in this word for goodness, which is, in my opinion, philologically connected to the idea of the Christ, you could also be saying, wisdom. And so like,
okay, so again, I most of that is, it's true in a fashion, but can I back up and explain some other stuff?
Sure.
Okay. So Christos is anointed, right? It's an anointing. And I think what you're encountering in those, I'd have to look at the actual fathers that you're talking about. But one of the things that they, of course, do is try to find patterns in the language that they're working with. And so if they're talking about it being, the anointed is good and things like that, they'll be working with these resonances and rhymes and analogies and allegories and so forth. So that matters. But Christian means anointed. And it's actually even more powerful than just good. It is chrismated, right? And when we are baptized, we're not just washed in the water. I was talking about Christ in the Jordan as baptized by John, and he pours water over him. But in baptism, and it's very early in the tradition, right? We're also marked with the sign of the cross on our forehead. It's a tau, effectively. It's like, and one of my favorite.
Goes into other
oh yeah,
it's a thing. It's beyond, it's bigger than just what we conceive of as Christianity, like Mithraism.
No, I'm gonna still hold the line that Christianity is everything. You're just gonna have to like flip your inside and outside there. But hold on. So,
I can dig it. I think Christianity is like a amalgamation of everything too.
It's all truth. Okay, so we're just gonna, but everything you keep saying is true, and therefore you're still not outside of Christianity. That Margaret Barker, if you haven't encountered her work, you're gonna enjoy, because she's very much into the way in which the oldest Christian traditions are actually participating in the ancient temple. And
that's true.
Yes. And she has a wonderful book. Well, she has a whole series of books. She just came out with a new book on Our Lady, which I need to read. She has a great commentary on John, Revelation. Temple themes in Christian worship is the one of the best ones, where she's showing how the earliest Christians are taking on all of these rituals from the ancient temple, which is what they see Christ as rebuilding, right? And also the incarnation is his entry through the Virgin Mary into the world, and she is his temple, right? So there's a lot of mystical symbolism around Mary as ark and temple and things like that. But with baptism, the anointing, it's with the sacred oil that is used to anoint the priests, right? So when in the letter to the Hebrews, it says we are kings and priests and we're anointed. Christians are anointed to be priests, and that anointing oil, it's got a lot of very powerful, both physical and symbolic properties. That it's got incense and I've read some things on it. There's psychotropic elements probably in some of these, right? That you're anointed in. It's like marked not just with a sign, but with the sort of power of the oil and the incense and such. That's what Christian is, right? We're the little anointed ones. It's a very, very powerful claim, because it says we are anointed into Christ's death. At baptism, you're anointed into the death of Christ. It's the ancient traditions have very powerful psychosomatic resonances that you're working with. The Christos as good, that's a sort of playing off of the meaning of the anointing.
Yeah, I think both can be in the mix at the same time. the anointing and the good,
but the Messiah means the anointed one, right? So he's the anointed one. And there's Psalms that
like
talk
the Hebrew
about
Mem Shin Hey, Messiah,
right.
Moses, a bunch of words come out of that.
He's anointed. He's the anointed one. And so Christians are the ones who are little Christs, right? We're sort of anointed like Christ.
You might even consider anointed as also being, in a way, like initiated, because those words go together. You've begun. You're not the unbegun anymore.
But if you think about all of the anointings, like, and so in Revelation is like the trippiest book ever, right? That the ones who died in the blood of the martyrs, so they're washed in the blood, but they're there in linen garments. Linen garments are what the high priest wore to go into the
I
Holy
almost wore linen today, but it was a little mildewy, needed
little on there. So all of it's so interesting that you want to know where Tolkien gets most of his most like astonishing symbolism. It's in the scriptures, right? It's not out there somewhere else that you have to go hunting. It's in the Bible that we don't read for its like literal visions as much anymore. And you think about like angels, right? I'm sure you've seen the video out there where it's like biblically accurate angels. Really go there. Let's go there. That's what you're talking about when you're talking about the Earendil, the song of the Aenir. They're angels, right? Shall we do that? And that's it. Why for me it's so delightful teaching Tolkien is everybody's like, Christianity, most of what people think of Christianity is this incredibly watered down 19th century Protestant terror of anything other than the historical Jesus.
I could come around to that idea that the Protestant Reformation was like a great reset of its time in a bad way. I could definitely get that idea.
And that's what both told. Lewis was Anglican. He never went full Catholic, but they both were readers of Chesterton. Have you read Chesterton?
Never.
Okay, so read The Everlasting Man. I think you'll enjoy it because he's trying to do what you're doing with these, like, where did the stories come from and how is it the deep myth and the truth, right? Chesterton he converts to Catholicism and he has some. I'll get you to convert to Catholicism, but we have to do a medieval version, right? It's a medieval version of Catholicism. That Chesterton has all these stories about how the Protestant Reformation is trying to wipe out the reality of the mysteries underneath the landscape of Protestant England, and it's there, right? It's like the holy places of the medieval mystery have been sanitized in very curious ways in modernity.
Okay, so to maybe keep us on the Tolkien.
We can go to Earendil and talk about angels. How about that?
Okay, yeah, take us through that. That sounds fun. I'm into that. I can already tell you and I probably need to talk more than once, but
probably. I told you I've done a whole class and series of videos on this, and I'm surrounded by books. It's so deep. It's so much fun, right? You can dive in here very, very deep. So both Tolkien and Lewis are great fans of astronomy. Well, Lewis particularly, right? Again, I'm only asking you not to quiz you, but to know where I need to help you.
Yes, and I mean that could be very likely be the source of scriptures itself. That's the scripture God gave us, in astrotheology sense.
Absolutely. So Lewis, are you a big reader of Lewis?
Not a big reader of Lewis, but he's got some real zingers quote wise that I'd love to belt out here and there.
Okay, which of his quotes do you like?
Lately, I just love telling people that all jobs exist to support the most important job, which is the woman raising children and taking care of the home. I'm paraphrasing. I'm not direct quoting, but
that hideous strength is the great version of that, right? Where they okay, so that hideous strength works in this. So he did the Planet series, right? His sci-fi trilogy, right? I can if you give me rope here, I can bring you but all around to all the questions you had, but it's probably a little too. My friend and I on the Mosaic Arc were joking. It's like I can throw a boomerang and it'll take 3 hours for it to come back, but I'll catch it. I don't think you want me to do that. But boomerang here is Lewis space trilogy, Tolkien time travel. That's how the Earth gets shaped spherical.
Man, and that's on my This is maybe a little known thing for people, but that in Tolkien's mythos, the Earth is flat and then gets reshaped spherical to basically conceal the Western lands from the those who don't belong there with the other gods, the undying lands. So, I mean, that could be allegorical to the Americas being lost by everyone except those in the know, which totally too big of a can of worms to open, but there's plenty of reason to believe that the Americas were never lost by whoever had basically there's like sea trading routes that have always been in existence, and probably even prior to the Phoenicians are kind of credited with that. And so anyway,
okay,
I do
let's
want
go
the
back to the
boomerang.
planets.
Let's get there.
Let's do the planets. Okay, so Lewis was a great fan of astronomy, and if you when he and Tolkien, they say nobody's writing stories the kind of stories I like, and so we did a toss up, and Lewis said he'd do space travel, and Tolkien says he did time travel. Lewis really did do space travel, but he did it in all of his books, and that's what's sort of curious about it. You think of the Narnia series as in a different world, right? Narnia, it's through the wardrobe and stuff like that. In fact, it's all about the planets, just like his space trilogy is. And there's a magnificent book by Michael Ward called Planet Narnia, where he shows all of this, that all of the symbolism that Lewis uses throughout the Narnia series is of the spheres. It's of the planetary spheres. And they all have characteristics that go with the particular planet that is their like governor, right? So the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is governed by Jupiter. Prince Caspian is governed by Mars. The Magician's Nephew is governed by Venus. The Horse and His Boy is Mercury. What am I missing? Last Battle is Saturn. I'm missing some, right? And it's only going to be the 7 planets, and it's going to include the moon, Silverchair, the moon and the sun as, and Dawn Treader is the sun, in that old Ptolemaic structure, right? So Earth at the center, planets going out there. And what Lewis was interested in was this the old ancient understanding of the planetary spheres as carrying the music. You see how we'll get to the Annalindale, right? That when in his space trilogy, the main character goes outside of the influence of the Earth and out of the silent planet. Earth is silent because we can't hear the music of the spheres anymore. When his main character gets up into outside of our atmosphere and into the actual heavens, it's full of music that we can't hear because we're in the fallen world. We're in the world that the Satan is in control of. Outside of that, it's all of the marvelous cosmos of the music, and that's what each of the Narnia books sort of participates in. They participate in the sounds of that beautiful music, except for the Silverchair, which is sublunary and in there. Does any of this make sense?
Oh yeah. The music of the spheres is why I want to talk about the Annalindale. Is that how he says it? The Cosmogony. Right.
Okay. So think about this. Both Lewis and Tolkien are working within this old, as Lewis called it, the discarded image, right? This was the old cosmology, which was, we are here on the Earth at the center. We're surrounded by these planets and their rotating spheres, surrounded by the fixed stars, which are out there on the edge, and their movement creates music.
The disposers, you could call them.
Their movement creates music because it's and it gets into Aristotelian and Ptolemaic understanding and such. But simply, music is this movement through time, and in the mathematical sciences, you go from arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. They're all part of it. You were talking earlier about the mathematical math, right? And the structure and the pattern. Medieval science knows this, right? It's always looking for all of these structures and patterns, and it's doing it both in language and in mathematics. And the mathematical structures are the ones that go into both music and astronomy because they're linked, right? Music is
arithmetic is number, geometry is space, music is time, and astronomy is all of them put together.
Precisely. Right. That's where we need to get to understand what's going on in the Annalindale. So that when Eru proposes the pattern, what is he going to propose? It's going to be music, right? It's going to be the music of the spheres. And so when the Einar start, hear the pattern he's proposed, it sounds like the music of the spheres, effectively. Although they're not spheres yet, they're not the planets yet because they haven't entered into the creation. But that's why the creation is through music, because the creation is music. creation of the cosmos is on the geometrical patterns of the music.
And now from this music of the spheres that Tolkien allegorizes, the most interesting, of course, aspect is the conflict introduced, that the most powerful of these secondary generation of gods from Eru is called Melkor, and Melkor has some knowledge of all of the other gods' intentions and their movements. It's even, I think, referred to as movements, like in a musical sense. But
they're movements. It's music.
Talking about planetary movements. So with that knowledge, he wants to basically figure out the secret of the eternal fire, if I'm not mistaken, like what it is that, and this to me is great because I think we see this today with satanic forces, if you will, that the mystery of the life force, the divine spark, that which animates all things. To me, like the mystery of the life force might as well be the mystery of God. I mean, they are the same mystery. And so with Melkor's ability to know somewhat of what the other gods are going to do, he then starts to try to impose his own creation outside of the intended music, thus birthing dissonance or evil into the world. And this makes him a type of demiurge character in a Gnostic sense. What can you tell us about like the insights and wisdom that we can derive from this cosmogony around comprehending the purpose and the place of dissonance or evil in our experience of life?
You will keep asking me these questions that take me hours and hours and hours to explain.
Well, you can't just put it in a 3-word soundbite. What? We'll do our best. We're
put it in
fun.
a story. Okay. So you see, this is what Tolkien's trying to give you the sense of these mysteries in story, right? And if I say to you something like, okay, the god is in the mythopoeia says we don't worship the artifact, right? There is a difference between the creator and the creature, the maker and the artifact, and the cosmos is the artifact, which is different from the creator. And this, I think, is, well, one, in the early Middle Ages, this was the big leap people had to make, right? They're comfortable, they're perfectly familiar with the idea of the deity, divinities or powers, right? Which is what in the Ainulindale, the Ainur become powers. They become the Valar when they enter into the creature, into the music that they've sung.
What I would say, like to add that to the life force concept, is the creator and the creature think about how the life leaves the eyes when something perishes, and that body is no longer what it was. This is the life force is the mystery, in the equation of the creation.
Well, okay, so this is the one leap that it does take to be sort of within the theological understanding, which is Tolkien's very careful to do this, and there is some scholarship in thinking about exactly Eru Ilúvatar, the Ainur are the first of his the offspring of his thoughts, right? And he is close to a Neoplatonic emanation in that, so that you have, in fact, the problem with the Neoplatonic emanation is there's no purpose to it, right? There's no willing of the one's manifestations, emanations, right? Same
problem with Buddhism that I think is pretty much the same thing as the Neoplatonic emanations.
Fair, yes. So in our understanding within Christian theology, God purposefully does it, right? It's like there's a willing of gods to make the creature out of love, right? And so they're different, right? It's not just an expression of his power; it is his purpose. That within the ancient world, they're perfectly aware of the powers that are out there, right? The powers and principalities that you said, satanic or fallen. It's like whether what demons are is a big question in a lot of people's meditations right now, and even in the Middle Ages, they're like, exactly why are the fallen angels have the role that they do? A lot of theological discussion. That we clearly do have invisible intelligences around us somehow, right? Whatever they are. And I think you pointed to right now saying somehow we're sensitive to them now, that anger at the life force, that envy, that Satan clearly has for our life.
Yeah, I mean, it's evident in the whole fallacious quest for artificial intelligence.
Well, that will just say straight up it's demonic. Unfortunately, all tech is kind of demonic, which if we want to go to the Enochian stories, right, it's the fallen angels who give humanity our weapons and cosmetics, basically. Illusions and power is one of these things that first, for all of humanity, we've recognized to have backfired on us, right? You make things and they act back on you, or you become covetous and possessive of them. This Tolkien looks at this a lot, right? It's like, what's the ring?
Oh yeah, I mean, Mordor is a giant allegory for industrialization.
Well, and
amongst other things, it's one of the allegories there.
It's also, he's we're getting to Melkor, right? Constantly worried about the effect of becoming possessive of our own creations. And you sort of step back through, maybe not Melkor yet, but look at Feanor when he makes the Silmarils. So the Silmarils contain the light, and you were meditating for there on the fire that Melkor desires, right? The Silmarils are gemstones that contain the light of the trees, the blended light of the trees. So they're basically diamonds, but they or flashlights, but they're gemstones that contain these lights, and they're so beautiful that everybody ends up desiring them. Melkor too, right? That he ends up killing the trees with Ungoliant's help to get those Silmarils. But Feanor falls when he becomes so possessive of his own artifacts. They're beautiful things that he won't let them be sacrificed in order to save the life of the trees. There's layers in the Silmarillion. He can't save them because they've already been stolen. But the problem of our fall, which
leads to the first kinslaying.
Always. Right. And that's what you're wondering about. What is Tolkien doing with Melkor and the dissonance? The obverse of we are made still by the law in which we make still by the law in which we're made is that we can become so attached to the things that we've made that they destroy us. And I think, AI or our ability to talk in this particular format, wherever you are, wherever I am, writing is one of the first demonic interventions. And therefore it's very interesting that, the logos, the word is, enters into our consciousness now because we've got books and we can read them. All of these things, Tolkien is constantly trying to understand the way in which we as makers make things that then become idols is the proper word, become the thing that we become so attached to that we can no longer let go of it. The precious.
An interesting link to just throw on the fire here, so to speak, is that I think that the etymological origin point of logos may be the Druidic log, which is like the fire in their ceremonies. The Druids who would not permit things to be written down in their doctrine, that they must be committed to memory, very different philosophy than what followed with the, secret of letters being then put into actual documents.
Right. But I mean, to think AI has the same kind of properties and problems as writing. AI
is completely made out of writing.
Yes. And we can use it to lie. But the problem is we can use speech to lie too. Okay, so now all of these things go into what's up with Melkor, right? It's like, how do you understand why we would turn away from singing the song that the creator proposes? Why would we do that?
And the most powerful of the created is the one that turns away.
But we all do it. You and I were mentioning sin a little bit before, right? What's sin?
It's fuck around and find out.
but it's so the thing that Tolkien said he tried to do in all of his stories, and he says this in one of his letters, is to make visible and physical the effects of sin and misused free will. So make visible and physical the effects of sin and misused free will, and they're the same thing, right? It's Melkor is made. All of the Ainur are made, and he proposes the songs to them, and they sing with different voices, and they have this Tolkien is he's constantly thinking in terms of sort of symphonic harmonies, right? That's like the splintered light. It's all of these different colors that go into the rainbow, and it's splintered out, and we become, beautiful in all these different ways. I think that's, you mentioned that you wanted to talk maybe about other kinds of creatures that belong in this story. That's why he's big on elves and dwarves and hobbits, and it's like the splintering of Iluvatar's creative joy goes into all of our different modes, right? And likewise, the Aenir sing in all of these different musical voices, and they sing together and such. It's like, why aren't we all just harmonizing in the beauty of the song? Because that is in fact what heaven is, right? It's the harmonious singing in praise of the creator. Why turn away from that?
Is that a question that only we can answer for ourselves, or is that the eternal question?
Well, it's indeed, right? It's the Melkor question.
Is that the nature of question itself?
Yeah. No,
because
seriously,
we're talking about like in that divine harmony in eternal sense, there would be no questions. Everyone would know what their role was. Everyone would sing their part. So like almost questioning itself is kind of what leads us on this quest of material life and a timeline with a beginning and end outside of the circle that is God and eternity.
Yeah. And so what's interesting about it is that in my classes, we talk through the Melkor problem. I always, for the music of creation lecture, I go through different samples of music to say, what do you think which of these sounds do you like the music of creation? And there's sort of different problems metaphorically of, well, is it simply orchestral, right? I start with some Beethoven, right? I think I do start with Beethoven. Is it voices only? So it's like plain chant. Is it, what do I work through? It's plain chant with the words that go with the incarnation, some Hildegard and things like that. And then I say, okay, so what does, I know there's another in there that's like romantic tone poems that have music that sounds like pictures. So Smetana's Mavlast, the music of the river kind of thing. Cause like the Ulma with his river sounds, it's like, can you hear the music of creation in the creatures as they play along on the river or something? And everybody goes, oh yeah, okay.
Think of Bacchus and Bach, words that mean river.
Nice.
In German.
Nice. Yeah. So we listened to all that, and everybody goes, oh, that's very nice. And I go, okay, so what does Melkor sound like, right? And then I always I have one of Blind Guardian's songs. Do you know their music?
I don't, but I remember that
It's metal.
I remember Melkor's music had to do with like being very repetitious.
Blaring and trumpets, and it's
and it just makes me think of the way that the tyrannical dictator operates in convincing the lie to people is through repetition. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, dictator even means in a philological sense to repeat oneself over and over again, and that's how lies gain ground and get established, is through this repetition aspect. So I imagine Melkor's music is something that is like very repetitious and doesn't, change much. It's just like, I don't know. Metal though, could be.
The students always love it. They're all like, oh yeah, we've the Beethoven, that's nice. Some Blast, that's nice. Okay, fine. Plain chant, Gloria, Hildegard. Okay, cool. And then I play Blind Guardian. They're like, oh yeah, that's cool, right? And one of the problems that Tolkien points to is that Melkor's music was most like the sorrowful tune that comes in the third theme. So humanity is drawn to it. We are drawn to that destructive, long, power. So, Melkor is a meditation on why we sin, why we fall away from that harmony. And
Eros and Thanatos.
Yeah.
Death instinct.
Yeah, so I don't tend to go with those mythologies, but yes. It's like we are somehow, and what's interesting in Tolkien is trying to figure this out. Why are we fallen? It's the huge mystery. It's like, why aren't we simply in heaven always?
That's the eternal question, and good one to leave us pondering, for the as we wrap up the first hour, because it's I don't think that we'll maybe be solving the eternal question anytime soon. But in terms of the narrative element of creation and subcreation, being that we are existing in a creation, the aspect of conflict and dissonance is integral to a good story. And to me, like, it's a simple answer, but that answer works for me, that we have the dissonance, we have the fall or the perception of separation, because you can never truly be separate from that which is all. It doesn't.
Well, that's true too. I mean, God loves us so much; He's not going to let us go. It's our choice to go away. But what Tolkien says, he says in one of his letters, there can be no human story without a fall. It's just like, it's what we are. And it's the misused free will that's the challenge, right? We really can't, we can choose. Our choices matter eternally. And that's another, so, the other great theme in The Lord of the Rings, on the opposite of the ring, is, of course, it dominates wills, is the character's capacity to choose. So and you say we don't have stories unless we have those choices. We recognize the power of our ability to make choices.
You could even look at the way that sin affects us in our health and our vitality. That, to me, I'm somebody that, we haven't brought this up, but I'm actually someone that works with the energy body with people to help them find their beliefs and expectations about life that are limiting their own expression of the life force erroneously, if you will, and reconnect them to a more complete sense of their wholeness and their power and their divine spark. And basically, I don't know what I was about to say. Dang, I lost it. But what was I on about?
I've confuddled you because I've tried to restructure your thinking here. Make you medieval with me.
Well, let's just hold that thought here. And, a second hour, I do want to talk more of the hints at a hidden history that Tolkien might be giving us through his works. I'm super into that idea, and, picking up where we left off on possibly some of the other concepts in the first hour, but definitely that, and the humanoids, other forms of humanoids, all very cool. This has been an excellent and quite exciting first hour. So thank you for being here. Please let people know where they can once again find your work and connect with you. I know you've got a Telegram channel, so lay it on us, Rachel.
Okay, so the parent site for everything is dragoncommonroom.com, and I will beg you to go visit it right now, because we're running a Kickstarter for a story that we're writing called Draco Alchemicus. You're going to have me back on to talk about all the alchemical stuff there.
I'm in.
Yeah, and the last full day of the Kickstarter is Monday, so this is nicely timed for to get your excitement. And we have, if I might do my little promotion, some really great rewards for backers, including, I will show them these decks of playing cards, right, which will never be for sale. They're only specially designed for our Kickstarter, with the alchemical dragon on one side, you see, and the brazen serpent on the other. And your problem is understanding which of these is the dragon that we're talking about in our story.
All right.
We like mythology.
Oh man, and that just connects right to what we were talking about, and the instinct to, I remember what I was going to say. Yeah, that sin is more harmful on us when it's willful ignorance than when it is a nescient mistake.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And that's a fascinating part of all this too. You see people that don't know better doing all kinds of foolish things with their body, especially in youth, right? And that folly doesn't quite fall on them as it would once and you do it anyway.
I'm going to hold the thought that I have there, because I think it's a good, this is a good place to continue, to be continued.
Okay, thanks. Okay, we'll see everybody on the second hour, and thanks for being here with us on the free first hour. Rachel, it's been a lot of fun. Looking forward to continuing.
Thank you, Chance.
Thank you for tuning in to the podcast today. And with the topic of Tolkien, I don't think I could ever get enough. I already want to continue with Rachel into more conversing on the subject. hopefully this was enjoyable for the regular normal level fan of Tolkien's stuff, because I know that we didn't really talk a lot about the plot elements or analyze them of the Lord of the Rings proper. We were kind of all over the place. Definitely a lot of theology that comes with the territory with somebody like her. There's plenty of things that I want to pick up where we left off on, though, especially like, I had this entire intention to get into talking about Galadriel, the character who is one of the oldest beings in Middle Earth. If you remember, is it Kate Blanchett? Is that the name of the actress? I don't know, but she like almost takes the ring from Frodo, and she's like, "You would have a queen," and her hair is all flying back, and everything goes dark. There is such a cool weave probably to get into regarding Galadriel as a potential Lilith allegory, mother of monsters, who is basically good, but also terrible. Terrible as in like powerful, terrifying. Anyway, very, very fun time. I would totally do another chat with her. Maybe bring her to a Vibrant where the conversation can get a little more freewheeling and we can talk more plot points, Lord of the Rings. And interested in her comic book series that she mentioned as well, Draco Alchemist. So I will make sure and put the links in the show notes for her work on unauthorized.tv, The Forge of Tolkien, her dragoncommonroom.com, and her blog, fencingbear@prayer.blogspot.com. And I had a fun synchronicity with her regarding Owen Benjamin, his stream just yesterday. This happens a lot with Owen, but when I watch a stream, sometimes he'll bring up something that I was just thinking about. In the case of Rachel, what happened was someone wrote him a letter and he was reading it on the stream, and they were one of her students at one point. So they mentioned her and he's like, "Oh yeah, I love Fencing Bear. Cool." And then the very next day, here I am talking to Fencing Bear. Never before had I heard him mention her. So that was cool. Happened again last week where I was listening to Owen and he had talked about his brother. And then, maybe a week later, I asked Jennifer, I was like, "Have you ever seen him bring up his brother on the stream?" And the next day he plays a clip with his brother in it, which I'd never seen him do before. So funny stuff like that. I just like the little winks, the synchronicity winks, sync winks, maybe you could call it. They give me a feeling of being on the right path, and they happen all the time. Most of them are kind of too personal or may seem too small to be worth sharing, but keep note of those guys. They're like markers on your path to help you feel confident that you're on the right one. And if you feel out of synchronicity, maybe work with me for some tuning, because that can really help. The synchronicities are always there, but we just got to clear our filters so that we can perceive them more clearly. Now, in the topic of Tolkien, I think we could do a lot more to discuss the elements of the ancient mystery tradition that are extant in his work, as well as, and maybe we need to talk to somebody else. Not that I wouldn't talk to Rachel again, I'm sure we will, but maybe we need to talk to somebody else. So if you know other Tolkien experts, I would love that. If you go back into the archives pretty far back, there are some shows with Dr. Becca Tarnas, Tarnas, Becca. She is also academic who has done a lot of good work on the Jungian elements of Tolkien. And we had a great couple of talks with her, more about fairy stories in general. And I hope you guys enjoy that if you want more Tolkien content that I was a part of. It's hard for me to recommend things from 2 or 3 years ago, 4 years ago, because I'm so different now that I'm like, don't listen to that guy. But those were good chats. I definitely could recommend those. I actually wanted to continue talking with her, but disagreements over the nature of cooties and the importance of certain things that were pushed around cooties seem to have made us no longer able to align. And, maybe that'll change in the future, but I'm kind of over it. Hopefully that doesn't take you out of being interested in those old shows, though, because they're really good. They are quite entertaining for the Tolkien file. So, things that were on my mind in this chat that we couldn't quite get to would be getting further into the allegory of the Atlanteans or the Phoenicians. in particular, how they are portrayed as in the extended mythos, legendarium, if you will, of Tolkien, as the Numenorians, this island civilization that were rewarded by from the gods for their role in helping take down Melkor, the evil, deranged demiurge god during the First Age. And an island is raised in the middle of the Western Seas for them to have their seat of their empire. And then that is lost as they fall into kind of like satanic human sacrificing obsessions for chasing immortality. And it's so funny how our perceptions can turn a gift into a curse and vice versa. Because these Numenorians, Atlanteans, Phoenicians, and this is kind of in the lore around the Atlanteans too, and why it sank, according to maybe the more mystic side, Steiner-esque side, that their own vain pursuit of immortality is what destroys them in the end. And yet the immortal beings look at the ability to die, the capacity to die and pass away that man has, as something to be jealous of, as a gift. So, never be afraid of the end of one story and the beginning of another, because that's really, in my opinion, all the transition probably is. You exist, you will always exist. It's not like you're going to cease to exist. And it's this clinging that comes from a fear of not existing, which is an erroneous fear of something impossible. That is what leads to this concept of the, hungry ghost, which is what demons are in my study, in my opinion. I also really would love to talk more about the Ark mythos, possibly with Rachel, because that's a never-ending gravy outlet. And in fact, the Ark, it comes from a similar word that I believe the Norse people used for the earth itself, which is arga. In the Greek, you have argos, or things along that line relating to the boat. So the earth is like the macrocosm ark, that all things are preserved in the earth, and even potentially like things that we consider extinct are just waiting in the soil to be birthed again when the conditions are correct. And so with arga being a word, or eartha being words for the ark and the physical realm that we're on, Tolkien called the earth Arda, like with a D. So I think he was hip to exactly what I'm talking about. I'm sure he was. And if there was one person who's deceased that if I could just make a wish and have them as an interview, it would be J.R.R. Tolkien. And I also really appreciated Rachel in this conversation for, something that maybe going into it, I had a little hesitancy about, that she's ardently Catholic, right? But as much as I've done a lot of work exposing the fraud of the priesthoods, and in particular how, this is my position, that the Vatican has done a lot more harm than good overall, there is still something really cool about her perspective and her relationship to that tradition. And that I feel that she does a pretty good job with the universal aspect of what Catholic is probably meant to represent. And that truth is evident in all places at all times. That's the nature of truth. It must be self-evident. And so that's a valid path too. There's many people who Catholicism was their initiation to the sacred. I believe those exact words came from a recent guest, John McHugh, who was an awesome astrotheology teacher, who I ought to hit up and have back on soon. That's a good idea. So if you're interested in the second hour of this chat and you only heard the first hour, part 2, we take a pretty circuitous route along many subjects. The boomerang goes far, but it comes back. And we talked about the axis mundi, or the world mountain, how that shows up in Tolkien's work and like just the idea of it. And then Earendil, Ireland and Anglo Saxon literature, Earendil being a Venus allegory, simply put. We'll save it for your discovery if you sign up to InnerVerse Plus and get the second hour. Then we had a talk about what philology is, how we can know things through the study of language and the descent of various aspects of language. And we straight up do not see philology quite the same way, but yet we do. And this was, this is what I liked about talking to Rachel, is that we are at odds in some of our perspectives or conclusions, you could say. Yet the respect and the fun of this conversation was there the whole time. There was no debate about it. There was constantly a returning to like, oh, well, here's how what you're saying is like what I think, and we kept finding those middle grounds where all of the value is really at. I really appreciate that. I really, really appreciate that. To be able to hold contradictory conclusions, but still have a helpful conversation it's enlightening. It's really wonderful. So, and me saying that isn't to try to like sway you away from maybe agreeing with her take on philology or on Catholicism. You do you. It's all good. I think she's great. And then we also continued on to talk about Tolkien's unfinished sequel to Lord of the Rings, The New Shadow. We discussed why civilizations fall, back to that question of evil and the purpose of dissonance. Then we discussed the philosophy or the doctrine of the Trinity. I know that's probably a tired topic for a lot of people out there, but I thought it was good. There was no like beating you over the head with any like dogma whatsoever. It was just couple of deep thinkers sharing what they have learned about a particular subject and what they think reflects in nature about that. And then we finished up discussing the other types of humanoids in Tolkien and how that relates to cryptids and aliens and fairies and elves and angels and demons and oh my, all of that and more. So if you want to hear the second hour of this chat, please go check out rockfin.com, ROKFIN.com/InnerVerse or patreon.com/InnerVerse. Either one of those places you can support me and get the second hour of the talk. Or if you just want to go whole hog, you probably should just get on unauthorized.tv and tune into the Forge of Tolkien, her series there, which I would love to do, but I've had problems with unauthorized accepting my card. I need to resolve that, but probably shouldn't even say that. I don't want to turn people off to trying. It is a great platform. And so I'm going to also offer up right now that there's still some slots available. I'm looking at my calendar for July. Actually, a pretty good amount. Like going into the third, fourth week of July, there's definitely still some openings to do a tuning with me sooner than later. There's always probably going to be a 4 or 6 week delay on when you can book because I just fill up. But, let that be a testament of that it's good, that it's useful. And if you want to help yourself achieve a more comprehensive, full body, hell yeah, flow state, then tuning is a great way to do it. Please hit me up at chance@innerversepodcast.com. Learn more about the tuning process, innerversepodcast.com/sound-healing. There's all that and more. So if you look in the show notes, the description of any episode, including this one, lots of ways you can support me and my work through affiliates like Clive DeCarl, who's got excellent supplements, or picking up audiobooks that I've narrated, collaborating with Dylan Sacosio in the Spirit World, the series. Also, AquaCure is on there, a hydrogen gas generating device that I've been inhaling like mad. Seems to allow me to function with a lot less sleep, which is cool. And I think that's it. There's probably other affiliate links on there. Oh, Tippecanoe herbs. Duh. Get you some Tippecanoe herbs, y'all. InnerVerse is the coupon code for 10% off. I particularly enjoy the Kapow and also their essential oil roll-on sticks. Those are really good. But Kyle and Serena over at Tippecanoe, they got teas, they got tinctures, and everything in between. So check them out, support a wonderful family. And I'm going to play us out with a track by my buddy Oliver, aka Volo. If you heard the vibrant intro music, which hopefully you have, since I play it weekly, every week that we do a show. Hey, I just got a notification email that my most recent purchase from Tippecanoe Herbs has arrived. So I'm going to go bust that open. Very cool. So anyway, I'm going to play us out with a brand new tune from Volo. This is not yet released. I think it's going to premiere soon or in a few days, but this will be the first public place you can hear it, which is cool. He offered me that honor, and I very much appreciate it. So the track is called Northern Gate. He claims it to be a genre-bending journey. It's got guitar and percussion too. It's a collab track. Pretty cool. Gonna enjoy listening to this in the premiere again. It's a good one. VoloVibes.com if you like his music. Support a great dude, fellow listener of the show, and awesome musician. And with that, I guess I'll wrap it up. Having too much fun to hit stop, but got to finish somewhere. Looking forward to putting this one out. And yeah, let me know if you know some good Tolkien scholars that are not, too woke to function. And we'll do more Tolkien talks if you like it. Lord of the Rings is a never-ending gravy flow. So you guys have a great time wherever you're at. Remember to be good, because it's good to be good for good's sake. Much love. Bye-bye.